Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I do apologize for the sound in the background. That is going to be ongoing until I can sort of figure a technical fix to this. I've tried filters, but that hasn't worked. I've tried different uh, automated processes in Audition. I haven't really been able to get that to sound the way I want it to sound. Um, I'm gonna maybe have to try some kind of barrier or something, but it's just simply too hot, and we have the AC on, and it'll probably be on for most of the summer. I'm gonna, but again, I'm gonna try to find a fix. So today I'm doing a Q&A. Before I start, go check out Wandering Heroes of Ogre Gate at Drive Through RPG or Studio 2 Publishing. You can also go to our website. You can find the links to both the print and the PDF version. Just a reminder, all of our PDFs are at Drive-Thru, but our print material is all at Studio 2. And most of our books are in print. There are a handful, like the Tournament of Dalu and the Sex of the Martial World books, that are not print books. Maybe one day they will be, I don't know, but for the most part, all of our books are in print. So, you can check that out. Also, I have a Thundering Sword review up at Eastern Kicks, and soon I think I'll have a Intimate Confessions of a Chinese Courtesan review up, which that's one of my favorite movies, so I'm very excited about that one. And yes, you can check that out, and of course, Strange Tales of New England is up. So I'm doing a Q&A today, and this one's a little different. So somebody in my Discord channel had read one of my recent posts. I had posted about D&D-isms. It wasn't the main point of the post. The post was about long-term Wuxia campaigns, but I have a very lengthy section on D&D-isms in there, because I think sometimes people sort of dismiss D&D in general for genres outside of things very specific to fantasy, and they are a little dismissive of things like dungeons and stuff like that being in a wuxia game. And so I talk about that, and I'm not going to get into that now because I already discussed it. But the person was basically wondering, because I was talking about kind of like D&D and old school D&D stuff, they wanted to know what my thoughts were on Gygax's quote from the DMG, and this is the person paraphrasing. I'm not sure how accurate it is. You cannot have a meaningful campaign if strict time records aren't kept. So number one, I love the 1E DMG. I think it's the most enjoyable DMG of all of them to read. I think every DMG after that, like going straight to like the 2E and then anything that comes after, they were all boring. And I love 2E, but the DMG for that was dull. The campaign and Catacomb Guide was a little better. That one felt a little looser, and that one had better content in general, I think. Or at least it had very important supplementary content to what they put in the 2E DMG. But I think that the 1E DMG is just a good read, and I think it's a little bit of shame that people get hung up on some of the details, like this one and some of the other things in there, because it's a very fun read. It's got a lot of flavor, a lot of personality, and he has a unique voice, so it just feels conversational. And I think the one in DMG, he's just throwing a lot of stuff out there, and you kind of have to sift through it and use it in the right context. So the question is, I guess, how I would apply this to Ogre Gate specifically. I don't believe in. I think, first of all, there's been recent discourse online on Twitter and stuff about this quote. I am not really interested in that. I don't think that you have to keep strict time records. I think that there's a lot of different ways that people can do D&D campaigns. I think D&D has things in it where time becomes relevant, and you have to pay attention to that. So like, obviously if you're using the 10 increments in the 10-minute increments in the dungeon, which one he uses, you would want to keep track of 10-minute increments. If you're trying to track how much the party is healed, you have to keep track of the days. Things like that. And I think in that section, he's specifically talking about issues that come up when you have multiple parties in a campaign world. And something that people have sort of extracted from that, beyond just this idea of keeping accurate record of time, is one-to-one time. And I think that gets very confusing. I think that section where he's talking about that is incredibly opaque. I think that it can be interpreted a number of different ways. I don't know that the people advocating one time are interpreting it correctly, But either way, I don't think one-to-one time is particularly useful, at least as it's broadly been understood in this conversation that's happened on Twitter, for D&D or for Ogre Gate. I do not use one-to-one time. What I use when I have multiple campaigns operating at the same time, what I do is I treat them as operating in totally different multiverses. Simply because when I was creating Ogre Gate, I had about 3 or 4 campaigns going at once. And as you can imagine, tracking that many campaigns with all that's going on and not having contradictions or paths crossing in weird ways that don't make sense because one group skips a week, and it just there was just the only way to really manage it in my mind was to say these are all independent Ogre Gate campaigns that don't impact each other. I understand the appeal of having them all impact each other, but I couldn't keep track of it if I tried, and I did try. Initially, I tried to do that, and it just wasn't working. So we just switched to a multiverse approach. You could do real time to do that, but real time has its own problems, and I don't want the problems associated with it for my Ogre Gate campaign. Where I have used real time or one-to-one time is in Strange Tales of New England. It's presented as sort of the default, but highly optional because I know most people won't like it. So you don't have to do it, but that's how I ran Strange Tales of New England, and I did it not for the reasons of what people who mention this quote are going on about on Twitter. I did it because it produces a very surreal effect if you really lean into this idea of one-to-one time with the real world, which is what I was trying to get. So it's mostly for the surreal effect. And again, it was highly optional, but it's not something that I would have advocated for in Ogre Gate. In Ogre Gate, you do have to keep track of time for certain things. If players are traveling, that's going to take a certain amount of time, and that's relevant to things like healing and like recovering from imbalanced stuff. So I mean, and again, the GM is free to set one of the things that we did when we made the survival rules for that setting was I made them like a dial. So survival is kind of how encounter stuff is all managed. So if you are exploring the wilderness every day that you travel, you would roll survival for the relevant terrain that you're in, and if you fail, there's an encounter. However, the GM can set that dial as finely as he wants to. So if you're and terrain can include cities and stuff like that. There's a sub-skill for cities. So say the player is in a castle or in a fortress or in a cave, the GM might decide, well, now we're going to work that at increments of 10 minutes because you're exploring this location that's filled with danger, or it has a lot of people in it, and so the chances of not having an encounter every 10 minutes is pretty slim. So I'm going to set it to 10 minutes or an hour or whatever you want. So the GM can kind of fine-tune that dial according to time. And when you do that, obviously timekeeping will become important. But the way that I keep time in my campaigns is one of my players tracks the days. If we need them to track hours or minutes, they track that. And that way I'm freed up to focus on other things, but I know how much time has passed. And we have a calendar of things that are coming up, so we know when things are going to happen. I think the most important thing is if you're running a campaign, you do want to make sure if an NPC says to a player, "Oh, in a week we're going to do this," that you mark that down and that you are tracking that sort of thing. But otherwise, I'm not. That quote really isn't one that I think of very much when I'm running my game. The stuff with D&D-isms I was mainly focused on were very gameable things like dungeons and encounter tables and things of that, large selections of magic items or spells. I'm not saying that Ogre Gate has all these things in the same quantity, but I was thinking in those terms. So when we made the Objects of Power section, I did that because one of the things that I think magic items in D&D are functional for, beyond just sort of buffing up players and stuff, is as sources of adventure. So I kind of tried to come up with stuff that I thought would be, if the GM's flipping through the book, it might give them ideas for an adventure they're going to run. And so yeah, so I was thinking more about that sort of thing, not about um, strictly you can't have a campaign if you don't keep strict time. I so on that topic, I think that I just think that well, obviously in the internet people say things very starkly in order to attract views and get traction. I don't understand the debate about that. Again, I always felt that that section was particularly cloudy, and there seemed to be this argument that like one small group of people had figured out and everybody was playing wrong. I have no objection to people playing the game in a way that makes the game better for them. So if using one-to-one time works for them and they want to talk about it, I mean that's fine. I think when we get into this business of saying, well, we're the only ones doing it the right way, that's when it gets a little bit more iffy. And I don't know. I just think that the 1E DMG is a pretty chaotic book in general. So you kind of have to you have to take everything and apply it in the context it's meant to be applied. And it can sometimes be a little tricky to do that. It's not a perfect book. It's just a very good book. It's a very interesting read. And I don't know. I mean, I think you got to take what works for you. Just take what works. And if something doesn't work, you don't have to take it. Just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater with any of this. When I went back to the 1E DMG, it was on the heels of having run many 3E campaigns. I was always more, when 3E came out, I was much more of a fan of second edition, and I was very reluctant to get on board with 3E because of the emphasis on tiles and miniatures, which I just didn't use in my campaigns. But it became such a juggernaut that you basically had to run it. So I within 6 months I had picked it up and I was playing it and running it. And I got very frustrated with the way adventures were structured. I got very frustrated with the culture of play. It just had felt like the game had really moved far afield from the things that originally made me interested in it. And so I went on Amazon and because I had lost all my old D&D books. I had a few, but not many, because I had moved many times and thrown the books away. And so I ended up ordering the 1E DMG and a number of other 1E books for like 2 cents on Amazon. It was very cheap. And I just kind of I honestly thought I was going to read it and kind of laugh because of how silly we used to do things. Because again, this was still at a point where I think we still saw that D&D's evolution as an evolution, as it's only going to get like better and better, and this is more the way we're going to play the game as time goes on. And I kind of had a scales falling from my eyes experience when I reread the DMG, because I hadn't read it in ages, and a lot of the stuff that I thought I was going to say, oh yeah, remember when we used to do this and how unrealistic it was or how whatever, I realized, oh, I really want to do that in my campaigns. Why did I stop doing that? Because I remember when I first started playing, our games much more closely resembled the stuff that Gary's talking about in the 1E DMG than what I was doing in, say, I don't know what year this was, like 2004, 2005, whatever it was. And again, it just really showed me there was a lot of value in going back to this old book and the older approach and finding where I felt my campaigns had gone off the path. That didn't mean you had to take everything, but it did mean it was worth exploring the ideas and figuring out which ones added to the game. And so again, that's my experience with the 1E DMG. I think that, every camp, as people have probably noticed, and I mentioned this in the Discord, my approach is not prescriptive. I will tell you what works for me. I will tell you what I think about things. So I'll be very frank in my opinion of mechanics or systems or whatever. But if you're running Ogre Gate, I don't really care how you run it. It's your table. It doesn't affect me. If you have any confusion about the game, I'll clarify as best I can. If something's not working and I can identify from my, just like what parts of the game you should be implementing that would make it work, I can help you. But, some like Ogre Gate is a very sort of sandbox focused game. I fully understand some people are going to take Ogre Gate and use the adventure paths that I was just describing myself running away from. And if they're doing that, they're not going to need to use all the rules and all the guidelines that are in the book. So, it just is going to vary depending on how you're implementing the game. There's like 1,000 ways to play an RPG. So, I'm not prescriptive. I don't cleave to that philosophy, because even my own style of play can change depending on what kind of campaign I'm running or what system I'm using. So anyways, with that, I'll let you go. And until next time, I'll talk to you later.